I'm a big fan of Park Chan-wook. I think he's one of the best filmmakers working today. However, I actually haven't seen most of his more popular films simply because I've been scared away by the content that I've heard is in them. Again, I haven't seen them, but from what I've heard, Park Chan-wook is a director who's very willing to show a lot of perverse things on the screen, and that can be pretty hard to get behind sometimes. However, as freaky as he might be as an artist, his last two films, Decision to Leave from 2022 and most recently No Other Choice, I can safely say are some of the best films that I've ever seen. So Letterboxd did this really cool thing where they invited Letterboxd members in Austin to a special free screening of No Other Choice about a week ago. So of course I hopped on that, followed into a theater full of other Letterboxd members, and had a great time with the film. Just a few things that I wanted to say about the film. Now, the first thing that's the most obvious is just the editing and the visual style of the film. Park is a director who's known for using a lot of super creative editing techniques, and so I went into the film expecting that. Having seen Decision to Leave, which is really just like he pulls out all the stops in that movie. It's like a crazy editing masterclass, just using all the techniques we have with like computer editing software that can even be done in the film. No Other Choice is very similar in that regard. It's a little more subdued. It focuses a little bit more on the performances of the characters, which I thought was great. But there's still a lot of like super cool, zany superimpositions and dissolves and transitions and just all the super cool, delicious stuff that you'd expect from someone who knows how to edit really well. Park is an unapologetically digital director, which I think is really, really cool. Because he's using the medium of digital filmmaking in a way that is just legitimately beautiful. I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking that things aren't good enough unless they're shot on film, which I mean, I fall into that all the time because I think that movies that are shot on film just look better, which might be true to a certain extent, but since it's often meant to just be heralding back to like the golden age of cinema to look like a movie that's older than it is, it's refreshing to see directors that are just taking movies that are just totally modern, stories that are set in modern day, shooting them on digital cameras, using editing techniques that are unapologetically modern so that they can actually start to create sort of a legacy of films that are of modern films, of films from the 2020s that are still, beautiful works of art. And that's what I like about No Other Choice is although it is modern, again, it's using these techniques that are very modern, it still feels like a piece of art. It feels like you're watching something that will be remembered, right? In the same way that when people first watched Citizen Kane back in the day, it was modern for its time. Now it's something that's remembered, right? So I think that it's really cool when directors are willing to make things that are set now, that are grounded in this time, so that we'll actually start to create a legacy for cinema now instead of always looking towards the past. The editing, of course, is super sharp. It's absolutely amazing. But the visuals were something that really took me by surprise because, again, although it's digital, we had some just absolutely stunning shots. There were moments in there where I was actually sitting in the theater, like, with my mind blown. Like, that is just such a pretty image. There's one image of the family kind of all hugging, and you got this pink sky behind them, and it's just gorgeous. There's a lot of plants and textures and trees that are shown, and it's just beautiful. Our main character is a gardener, and so we got these like really cool shots of him in his greenhouse. The landscape and the scenery of South Korea, which I believe is where it's shot, is just stunning and it's really, really pretty. So that was something that I was surprised by because Decision to Leave is visually beautiful, but it's a lot of these cold grays and, detective kind of, drama thriller colors because that's kind of the genre of the film. Again, looks amazing, but it's a different kind of amazing. This film was just like naturally beautiful. Like it was just that was the word that came to mind was just that it was beautiful. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the music. I read a Letterbox review before watching the film that said the music feels like a character of its own, and I was thinking about that the entire time, and I really, really resonate with that. The music really does its own thing throughout the film. There's a lot of these classical pieces that are memorable and recognizable, ones that we already know, that are used in really creative ways. But the music kind of just like goes along its own arc. Yeah, it feels like it's got its own character arc. And that's something I also think is really cool about Park is aside from just his technical prowess with filmmaking, he likes to use music in a really creative way. We live in this kind of like Hans Zimmer era of soundtracks that are really beautiful and are really, really good at fitting the mood of the movies that are being made. But because these are all original soundtracks, sometimes it can just feel very, very basic. Park does something different where he doesn't really have original soundtracks as much, but uses a lot of pieces in different creative ways. He's pretty much always using classical music, and so it gives it a different vibe, right? Because, like, decision to leave is not necessarily a movie you'd expect to just have straight classical music being used. It'd be something that you might expect, it's just some pumping, detective thriller kind of score. But instead, he uses classical pieces to enhance the mood and just to be more creative with it. That's what No Other Choice does as well. Classical music is a huge theme throughout. The music is used in a really creative way. Another thing that I thought was really cool is just the physical comedy of the film. Pretty much all the gags and jokes are physical. These actors aren't using their words as much as they're using their bodies to tell the story, and I think that that's super awesome. Of course, there are jokes that are told in the dialogue. It's a comedy, so there's lots and lots of funny moments. But I was particularly impressed by the physical comedy. Our lead does a great job pulling out his inner Charlie Chaplin and just pulling off some stunts that are just really really funny. The film is just it's legitimately hilarious. However, there's some interesting contrast here because there's a lot of really dark undertones. We're dealing with some like really bad crimes, like some murders and stuff that are going on. And so there's moments where you're laughing, you're like, this is absolutely hilarious, and then you're like, oh, that person died. Like he killed him. That's sad. Like that's tragic. Like, there's just sort of this contrast sometimes where like tonally it'll be like really funny, and then all of a sudden like, oh, that's really dark. And I'm sure that's on purpose, but it's definitely jarring in the moment where you're like, oh, am I supposed to laugh at this? Like this is kind of like not funny anymore. Which kind of leads to the final thing, which is just sort of the depth and the message that's going on here. I think it's a film that definitely requires a rewatch because the first time watching it, you're kind of just impressed by how cool it looks, by how technically magnificent it is, and then just by how funny it is because it's a comedy. But there's definitely some undertones here and some messages that are being said that I think are really, really important. AI is discussed here, which of course all movies are talking about that right now. And just like modernity and work and just like the workforce and modern society and how all this stuff kind of like leads to this nihilistic and sort of depressing mindset is touched on in a way that I think is really, really cool because none of our characters really end up happy. And although it's a comedy, although it's funny, you kind of come away from the film sort of like dissatisfied. And that's definitely on purpose because our characters are in a world that's really messed up. Park does a really good job of telling stories that are entertaining and interesting and funny while still reminding us that like this isn't a good place that we're in right now. Like the world is headed in a really bad direction. And it's just a creative, satirical, fabulistic is definitely not a word. It's a creative satire that gives us a message that I think is really important. Again, I can't really unpack the full message because I'm not sure I really got it yet. I'm going to have to watch the film again to really understand what's going on here. But I really appreciate Park's ability to tell stories that are entertaining and masterful and technically proficient, but are also deep and have a philosophy to them that actually matters. So that's my take on the film. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 and 9 out of 10. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm pretty excited for when No Other Choice actually officially comes out in theaters so I can go see it again. But until then, I'm pretty inspired to see the rest of Park Chan-wook's filmography, so perhaps I'll work up the courage to watch a couple of the films in the Vengeance trilogy. We'll see. All right, guys, stay tuned. I'll see you in the next one.